This week, we welcome special guest Doug White to the program. In the enterprise security news, next generation firewalls training. No more printers for sale from a particular company that is not HP. Net scouting, machine learning, Kubernetes. It sounds like something to do with cooking. Like I have some nice Kubernetes spread for my toast.
It does.
Or something.
Or a venereal disease.
Or that.
I got the Kubernetes.
Bad case of Kubernetes weekend. So itchy. Best firewalls, BF Sense, which are two different things, and more. Our topic this week is going to cover egress filtering for your network. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great.
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Stream over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and the Q&A forums. You'd pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but we have a special offer for our listeners. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription, visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES30. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 52 of Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined in studio by none other than Doug White. Welcome, Doug. You are still, of course, the Director of Cybersecurity for Roger Williams University.
I am.
And I just sit around all day and do podcasts and stuff.
Well, that sounds cool.
It's a hard job.
I like it. No, I that's what I've been doing a lot of too. Instead of directing any cybersecurity, it's like I'm just talking about it. It's like you guys know. I do a lot of things to stay technical, which is awesome. I was worried about that actually making the transition from actually doing enterprise security in an enterprise to being able to stay fresh with it. So I installed a firewall today. That's why. That's why you do consulting and all that kind of stuff because that's what I do. So I have a consulting company and we do,
I mean, nowadays too, you could spin up labs and, there's enough technology for me to stay fresh with around here, until we get people that work for me.
Or even just teaching something. If you teach something,
you got to go do it and then teach it.
You got to do it, then figure it all out, and then figure out how to explain it to somebody and then do it and act like you know a lot about it. So it's kind of, you stay pretty much on top of it.
Speaking of learning and teaching, IT Pro TV's courses now include computer hacking, forensic, investigator V9, Kali Linux, CompTIA, A+ 901, and accelerated CompTIA Security Plus. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and the Q&A forums. For a limited time, get 30% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription by visiting itpro.tv/enterprise security. Use the discount code ES30. And I tell you what, along the lines of training and learning and staying fresh with things, like everyone should just have a subscription. We've got run discount codes on the network for some time now. I feel like it's just something that everyone should do. Why wouldn't you, right?
The only drawback I have with these services like Cybrary and IT Pro TV is that I constantly feel inferior. because I just every day I look at it and there's something new on there and I'm like, oh man, I want to watch this, you know, and it's just like the next thing I know, it's worse than like Facebook or something. I'm like, oh, I'm going to listen to this, and then it's like, you know, oh, the day went by, and you know, and it's like that fun kind of stuff. But yeah, it's awesome. I think you need this if you don't have it. It's the way of the future and keeping up, and it lets you know what you don't know. So jump in. Don't be shy.
My firewall's not working yet.
His firewall's not working, so now's your chance. It's like, it's like the firewall's down. We're wide open.
We're wide open. Come pay us a visit.
Paul's new Windows NT website is up and running.
That's it.
Bring it.
All righty. We did so we're on to enterprise security news.
Oh, okay.
Fortinet is prepping for the next generation of their next generation. Next generation. It says it's their 4th generation firewall. That's why I said before it was next generation firewall. Apparently we're on the 4th. I would kind of agree that we're on the 4th generation.
It's getting there, yeah. That's the sort of like intelligent. I mean, once you go beyond just like deep dive.
3rd generation.
Yeah, that third generation crap. I mean, you have to get into where the things AI. I mean, now you're back to Neuromancer, and it's like, you know, you've got the ICE and all this stuff, and it's smart. And I figure the 5th generation is where it's going to strike back.
Yes.
That's sort of like the 5th generation is going to be like, not only does it stop you, it comes and gets you, and it's like that's it for you then. Good night.
Kind of like that book, Damon. You ever read that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know. So really, what they've described, there was no information that tells me exactly what new features you can expect in a 4th generation firewall, except more security.
Yeah.
So it's gone from network to Wi-Fi access to application to email, web applications to the cloud. Really speaks to me like they're more of security appliances. But I think that depends on the market. And it's interesting as I talk with companies. Obviously the SMB and mid-market, they're relying heavily on their firewall for a lot of those features, good, bad, or indifferent. I'd like to think I've heard less complaints over time about that, knowing Jack Daniel, who worked in that space for some time. It's hard to get. It's like anything else, right? Like your firewall is doing all of these things. It can only do so many things really well. But you dip into the enterprise, and people rely on their enterprise firewalls to do some security tasks, I would say, you know, filter out malware URLs.
Well, the smarter your firewall and the better it's tweaked, the less, you know, staffing you're going to have to put for like hands-on, boots on the ground kind of analysis. And, you know, but we advise our clients, you know, look at it from a, what do I really need? I mean, it's just like buying a car or buying a boat or anything else. It's like, what do you really need? What do you want? And what can you manage? Because those 3 pieces of it really become critical.
Yep.
So you really need this. I'd like to have this, but I can't afford it. And this piece over here, wow, that's fun, but what will we do with it? Right. So you have to kind of look at what are the threat vectors, how do they affect us, and how much management do we need to do with that, and then who's going to manage the thing? Because the more complex it gets, the more complex your people managing it have to get as well. So they're going to have to be able to deep dive at the same time. So if it's a neural net fuzzy analysis, you need people that can understand that, and that's very different than saying, is port 80 open?
Right.
You know, there's a long, big, vast continuum in between those two places. So you really have to kind of jump in there. And of course, you know, these guys are all about marketing things to you. So they always have to sell you bigger, better, faster in order to keep you upgrading. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that you need to assess that carefully before you dive in and say the latest thing is what I really, really need.
What I found on the enterprise was that the other features they built in just didn't cut. They would cut it for a small, medium-sized, mid-market business, not really for an enterprise. Like some of them would. I was playing around with like a captive portal on the actual firewall, right? Just in an enterprise setting, those features just didn't cut. Like you had the LDAP integration. I'm like, that's just not. And VPN's the same way, right? Because without the authentication piece and integrating with some kind of directory service, sometimes it makes it, you know, pretty easy. A couple of users, everyone gets an account, yay. But when you have to integrate with your 2-factor or your directory, such as the Active Directory, that gets way more complicated. And then it's just more taxing. Getting back to your port 80 comment, like the heart of it, like it has to block packets, right?
Absolutely.
So if it's doing VPN and it's doing a captive portal over here and it's doing some kind of malware analysis on specific protocols, I mean, pick and choose. I think some of the malware analysis today, I haven't played with it personally. I've heard that sometimes it does slow down pen testers specifically on Palo Alto.
I mean,
John speaks highly of Palo Alto.
Oh, yeah. Palo Alto is a very nice product. And, I mean, that thing can get very sophisticated. It could come right after you. It can block you based on very fuzzy ideas instead of just saying, it's port 80, I don't like it. It can look in there and say, here's a string, here's a signature. Wait, here's a signature that's like other signatures. But, again, all that, you got to tweak all that stuff, too. And it's a constant tweak because you may end up blocking things you don't want to block. Because just like an antivirus device, which uses signatures, you can get fuzzy antivirus. And, if you turn it all the way up on just like, deep fat fry or whatever the highest setting is, it may block things you don't want to block. And you're going to get all these false positives and all these other problems. Whereas then that can lead to you going, just turn it down on off because we're sick of this and it's blocking all this traffic. And then you're in worse case than if you just had something simple. So it's definitely a scalable thing you have to play around with.
I don't know. I definitely see people implementing their own VPN technology, separate capture portal, separate web proxy, separate email scrubbing system.
And I don't like to pile too much stuff on one system either because you're relying so heavily on that one thing to be reliable. And I like VPN is a great example. Using this VPN versus that VPN, pulling all in one box or even an expanded rollover, failover box can just be such a mess if you end up with a jam. So it's something you have to look at. It's very personal. It's like, why does somebody drive a Hummer and somebody drives a Prius? Both are viable. Both will get you there, but they have very different features, very different audiences, and all this is much like that to me when I look at the industry, and it's just everywhere, and you have to really be careful or you'll end up spending a lot of money on things you don't need and not enough money on things you desperately do need.
Right.
And the cloud. You start shifting stuff to the cloud. Now you've bought this expensive firewall appliance, and maybe you don't really need that expensive firewall appliance anymore because all that cloud stuff is somewhere else, and you're not even touching it. So I don't know. That's just me.
So Cisco continues to, or maybe this is just one big revamping of their. I saw an article, revamping of their training. I'm talking training and certification. Cisco Mastery training and certification. Are you familiar with this program?
I haven't read about it yet. I got a notice about it, so I was looking at it the other day because I have to renew one of my certs pretty soon. So I always look at what can I do next.
I put this in here specifically because you were going to be on the show. So it looks like to pay the scale with the TNW must be this website offering a deal. On Cisco Mastery course bundle, it says it's 90% off and it's only $74.
What certs are included in that, though?
It doesn't say.
That makes me worried.
Yeah, it says it's normally $3,200. I would be leery about this deal. For sure.
Sure sounds like a scary deal to me, 74. It's probably like a training bundle, though. It's not the actual certs. So it's
it's just training materials.
They're going to sell you like this giant stack of books for, 5 different certs if you want to pay $74 for a giant stack. I mean, I don't know. I haven't read it yet. But, I mean, that's stuff that comes around all the time. I haven't seen anything about Cisco totally revising their cert approach. So I think it's probably just training materials for Cisco Mastery is probably a collection of certifications.
It's their terminology.
Yeah, so it's like the person selling you the package would be my guess. Yeah. I'll look at it later and figure it out. But
access 9 comprehensive 24/7 courses, voice and unified communications, more ads popping up. Don't click that link in the wiki.
Yeah,
we'll make that not clickable. Be leery. I thought Cisco did some stuff. It says put together a network easily. That was my other point on that. Speaking of training and certification, it's really, it's not easy to put a network together in training. However, there's so many more variables when you do it in production, right? So many more things that can go wrong. So many more things that are either outside of your control or just crap you didn't know about. Like I once went to make some BGP updates and it doesn't work. And when you do that with BGP and it's the BGP for the internet connection, you lose internet. That's bad.
We've all done that.
We've all been there, right?
And then the phone rings and it's the CEO going, "Where's my porn?" I
read that training, and so I got trained on. I was like, "Oh, I think I know it," and then just putting it into practice. Obviously, as we both know, there's so many more variables.
Well, to me, there's 3 pieces. Again, there's 3 pieces of building networks. One in class. So if I build a network, I build it with my schema, with my what I call dogma. So if you've ever taken one of my classes, you hear me talk about dogma all the time, which is your beliefs. So why do you use 10.1.1.1 instead of 192.168.1.1? I don't know. It's just dogma. Right. It doesn't matter. You just pick one. But So when I build it, I know all about it because I use my dogma. So it follows my belief system, and everything is right in my world. When you build it, even with somebody else's network, you have to work with their dogma, even if it's in a class. So now it's different. So you have some challenges there. When you go to the real world, you're dealing with so many factors. If it's live, good luck, enjoy, especially if you're doing like I do and you become a consultant and you sit in. Because I get these jobs where they call and they say, our guy just got hit by lightning. He's dead. There's a little pile of ashes in the parking lot where he used to be. And you can still see the SANS badge laying there on the pile of ashes because it was inflammable.
It's horrible.
I know, I'm terrible. But
so graphic.
They call you and they say, "Look, Doug, we're down. We need you today. Can you come in and sit down in this chair?" And and you go, "Wow." And that's very intense because now you're building something that's a disaster. Everybody's waiting, and maybe they got customers waiting too. And I've done that a couple times. It was pretty intense. And so that stress piece, which is very difficult to simulate in a classroom, you can try, but it's really hard. I suggested in my class one time that somebody sit beside you with one of those air horns, and about every 10 seconds they blast it in your ear or smack you or something, or maybe tase you, just to sort of try to simulate what this will really be like when you're doing it in practice. And then you'll start to get the feel for why you get paid a lot to do this.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah.
Well, speaking of Cisco, apparently the FTC has approved the Broadcom Brocade buy if Cisco switch tech is walled off. So there's some kind of, and it's funny, there's a picture of the Great Wall of China, which I was just talking about the movie, which is weird, by the way.
I was just there, too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you were. So $5.6 billion. Been approved by U.S. FTC. They basically, these two companies control the switching, and as far as the fabric switching goes.
Right. I mean, it's the hardware piece and the software piece. You put those two things together, and they pretty much control the whole thing.
We had Brocade, storage area networking. Brocade was big. Yep. And I remember the engineers always telling me, I don't care, like, we're not doing this unless we're using Brocade switches. And everyone kind of squawked and they're like, no, like this is like the de facto standard for this specific application. Got to use Brocade.
Well, I built a couple of SANs for people, and if you build a SAN that, especially if it's a network IP SAN, so if it's doing that, go throw a cheap switch on there and watch what happens.
Yeah,
I don't care how good your SAN is. I don't care how good your server is. The throughput will be so horrific that it's just never going to work. So having the right chipset and the right processor speed and the right hardware to manage that, and the switching is what ends up being, and clustering is another place where that falls in, because clustering is something that can rely heavily on your switching ability. And if you get cheap switches or not very well managed switches or switches that don't have much processing power, your clustering is going to just totally tank. Because we built a giant cluster I think it was called Musix. It was from Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and we built a whole pile of machines. We were actually just doing a test, and we ended up with 25 Dell Optiplexes or something all connected together. And the switching just killed it. I mean, and we were using pretty good switches. I won't even say the brand, but we were using a popular brand of switches that I know a lot about. And it didn't do very well, strangely enough. And then we actually started experimenting with different kinds of switches, and it was shocking. I mean, even though they're all the same network speeds and everything else, it was shocking the way that the difference, how it affected those systems and whether they worked or not. And the clusters just failed, actually. The SAN stuff just gets slower and slower and slower. And so I would guess that's exactly what this is. It's about melding good hardware with good software.
Samsung has closed down its printer business.
Yeah.
So the headline was really funny. We'll talk about if this has an impact. I don't know how often you see Samsung printers, but the headline read, Samsung Electronics closes down printer business in 33 years. I'm like, does that mean in 33, you got 33 years to buy Samsung? Yeah. That's a really weird.
Store closing, get here soon.
That's right, get here soon within the next 33 years to get your
July 2050. That's right. We're out of here.
Wow. But it was actually after 33 years. They've closed it down. Most enterprises are all HP. I mean, HP has the corner.
Samsung never had a huge printer penetration, at least in the U.S. Maybe in Asia or somewhere, in Korea, maybe they have a lot of Samsung printers. I've never had a Samsung printer at all.
I've never had a Samsung printer.
I've never even seen one, I don't think. So I know they exist. I've never had one or seen one anywhere.
Maybe they were coming with PCs for a while, I want to say.
Oh, that could be.
Well, there was a whole scheme where you buy a PC.
Yeah, there was a thing like in the 90s and in the early 2000s where, buy a new desktop and we'll throw in a printer and a modem.
I don't see them in the enterprise. It says that market share after merging with Samsung's unit with a 4.2% share, twice as much as Canon. Pretty interesting.
Well, that is interesting. It must be in Asia then. Maybe they just control the Asian market because Canon. I mean, I see Canon print. I have a Canon printer at home actually.
Right.
I've never seen a Samsung printer.
So what I want to talk about, because you're a huge fan of this, of like not updating. You definitely lean toward. You were just telling me before, like, just use the stable version.
It's a filthy lie. I never said fake news. It's fake news. I swear. No, I was. He's not. I'm being.
He was.
No, I was. I really did say that.
You were like, don't upgrade. Just go with what's supported. And if it doesn't support it, just keep running what you have.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of I like updates. Forced when they work. But I like updates because security is good. Security is good. It's always on my mind when updating. Also, I like to think that I'm getting improvements when I update. Well, I mean, and I love to think that I'm getting the improvements that I've always wanted but never told anyone about. Like, I wish this was faster. Usually it's performance that I like.
So just to be fair to me, and he's not being, to be fair to me, but it's okay. He owns a place. What I was getting at and why he says I don't like updates is because I always had to manage real production networks. Yep. And like a lot of you that are watching the show, you manage real production networks too. And we all know that updates create instability. I mean, that's just that's their nature. And that's why we have patching plans, and that's why we have prod dev, supervisors, and we have somebody that has to sign off and stamp something to get an update. And the reason I resist these things, not because of security. When I see security updates, they say we need to roll those out as quickly as possible because that's where you get hosed, and that's worse than instability. But I also think, that if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, cliche. And a lot of times on your network, if things are functioning properly and you do go to an update and then they say we no longer support this chipset, and you go, half our hardware is running that chipset. Now what do? We already rolled this out in this West Coast division, and now the East Coast division is down. That was my whole thing with print.
If you have Samsung printers and you're not going to be getting updates, what are you doing? Right.
Yes. Well, there's that too, but a lot of it depends. So a lot of times, depending on the risk, you just have to look at the threat. If the threat is if I got an outward-facing server, I'm going to update that thing anytime I see a flash. But if we were talking about firewalls, and I was talking about how firewalls just don't have necessarily the level of threat vector that a server does. And you may not want to update it because...
Yeah, so I like to take my pain a little at a time rather than a lot all at once. So what I typically recommend is, I'm not saying apply every update for everything that you have as soon as it comes out all the time, because that's, let's face it, impossible in today's day and age, unless you're in a full DevOps environment. But even then, you have to take steps that review every update, right? So when we're talking about the context, let's say, of printers and networking devices and firewalls and appliances, I always encourage the teams, and did so myself, like, let's get notification that there's a new update. I'm not saying we have to apply it, but let's look and see what's in there.
And
right?
You get no disagreement from me on that, because...
But I like to apply it, even if there's no immediate benefit. I would always push for, let's just plan for it, right? Like, I'm not saying let's do it today, but let's say, hey, look, your project's ending 2 weeks from now. When that project's completed, let's just do this update. I know there's nothing compelling, because my theory is the longer you let those updates build up, now you're looking at, oh my God, we have to go from version 2 to version 4. and then you read about what that upgrade path is, and now it's a month process, and it's a lot more painful. That's why I started by saying I like my pain a little at a time.
I think really we're pretty much on the same page. I mean, I'm certainly not. We're kind of kidding because I'm certainly not the person telling you not to update stuff. But what I advocate
Doug
is,
hates updates. He hates them.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm like lock the whole place down and wall it off and put some mortar over it and just like get off the internet. It's a bunch of crap.
Just weld your server rooms shut.
Make your customers come into the office to use your system. That's what. But I advocate that you have a good patching plan. And so I think we're just talking about semantics, because what I believe is that you need to evaluate each update and each patch. You need to decide what the impact of that patch is. And if your plan and is reasonable, like Paul says, you don't want to end up on version 4 and you're running version 1, and you have to go through some ridiculous shutdown for 4 weeks.
But then there's also an emergency pending too.
Absolutely.
I mean, because you and I both been in this situation, right? Where management or even you yourself's like, holy crap, for the business, we have to implement this feature
today.
Something changed in the business, which forced us now to say, well, we can have a better process if we take this technology to the latest version, but we haven't updated it in like 5 revisions, and now it's a major deal.
So what I say is you have to have a good patching plan, and what I mean by that is your patching plan should take these things into consideration. So how unstable is the system going to be from these patches?
Right.
How long does it take to patch this system? Does it take days, or can you patch it quickly? Can you go from version 1 to version 4 by just literally going update and it takes 10 minutes? You need to know that so that you can have a reasonable patching plan to the different things that you control, because not everything is the same. You could patch this laptop, no big deal, but that server, you may run that patch and it brings everything crashing down and the world comes to a screeching halt for 2 weeks while you try to sort it out. So you really need to have a good plan on the impact, the cost, and how long it's going to take you to get that thing up to speed if you really, really need to. So all those things need to be considered when you develop a patching plan. So that's really my position. It's like sometimes you don't need to update, and it's just a lot of grief for no reason. And maybe when you get ready to update, you're going to do a complete reinstall, like say on a piece of firewall equipment. A lot of times that's just a whole new operating system is going in. On the other hand, if it's just some minor patch and has no impact, then why not do it? I would do it. I mean, if it's just some dinky thing and it really doesn't impact the system, I'll do those all the time. But that's part of my patching plan. So I'm going to look at it and go, this device, every time an update comes out, just update it. No big deal. This one, we don't want to touch this thing. It's running a weird ancient chipset that there's no drivers for. We don't want to get rid of it because it costs $275,000 and we're depreciating it over 15 years.
Yeah.
And we're not sure what their patches are doing right now, so we're going to have to take extra care on firewalling it. We're going to have to take extra care on managing it. And so it's a very,
and sometimes you run in those business decisions too, where you're like, well, patches break it, so we're going to run with it for a while, maximize our investment, and then just go get something new to replace it. Right?
Exactly right. And
that's why when worms come out for Microsoft vulnerabilities, that largely they're successful because people have made those business decisions. I don't really fault people for doing that because you can easily end up in that.
Well, there's the ivory tower of the podcast where we can say update. It's everything.
Exactly.
It's easy. But then there's the real world where you go to your boss and they go to accounting, and accounting says this is on a 22-year depreciation plan.
Yeah.
We're not getting rid of that server this year. Or we have a contract with Cisco. We can get rid of this, but we're going to pay for it anyway.
I do feel like, though, Doug, when it comes to software and DevOps, that we have a much better way today. And I think there's a lot of organizations that have been doing this for a long time. Of course, we always talk about Netflix, but a lot of the modern software shops are in the DevOps mode that I think lend itself towards they're always updating.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. And it's a shame we can't. It's harder to put that on physical devices because, let's face it, we're still going to have physical devices somewhere, like switches. And I mean, some of the routing can be virtualized, but at the end of the day, you're going to have stuff that has to physically print something, stuff you have to physically plug into, which doesn't really lend itself towards the cloud and containers and DevOps.
There is a modern dev prod that I don't like very much, but it's the reality, which is the beta world of companies releasing things and assuming that customers will essentially debug them or bug hunt them or whatever.
You're right. There is that whole notion.
That was a change from my mainframe days, where the idea was that IBM may release an update to this software and 5 engineers are going to fly in and spend 6 days installing it, which does
But the funny part is you had technology before everyone else did in the Windows and Linux world, you had technology on that mainframe. You could basically spin up an entirely new virtual
throw
environment,
a whole new shell up and
test it. And
absolutely. And it was very easy to test things like that. And that's why we had prod devs.
Yes.
So we had a prod dev supervisor who didn't know anything about the product. But if I wrote a piece of code, I went and I had to do all the paperwork and I had to have it all documented and I had to show the QA test. And then I take that to this prod dev coordinator and that person just checks off all that paperwork and says, you did what you were supposed to do, and then says, yes, put it in develop or put it in prod. And that was an important step in that whole process, because if my devs don't follow the right steps, they don't ever see production. And by adding security to those steps, which we didn't have because there was no such thing, but by adding security to those steps, you can also ensure that it had a security assessment.
Yeah.
And that means you got a better dev out there, and maybe you don't have to update so much, but that's not the
hard part is applying that to all the products.
Absolutely.
The customers you and I talked to, right? The hard part is applying that to a security team that stepped in. They've been developing code for 20 years. Yeah. There's 100 different applications.
Absolutely.
Those are the challenges.
But
Kubernetes is going to solve everyone's problems, right?
Of course they are.
Larry has the best quote.
You heard it here first.
And it's the same thing. It was my auth token. It's the same thing that people said about Perl or said in awk, right? It's, well, you have a problem, and I've used Kubernetes to solve the problem, and now I have two problems. Right?
I completely concur.
I said, and we've all been there.
Yeah, we've all been there. Lots of times.
I'm not the expert on Kubernetes at all.
Yeah, me neither.
I do need to start maybe testing it. They did have a new release, which is why we're talking about it today. It does do improvements to security are included, and of course, it's the orchestration for all of your containers. But it's very similar to what Apollo and I were talking about last week, in a similar context to what you and I are talking about in creating that development environment today. It's I've been in that situation, just managing very simple applications. Thankfully, like not that WordPress is all that simple, but you know,
and it's certainly not secure.
I've been stuck, right? We were not stuck, but didn't put effort into specific pieces. And when it comes time to upgrade those, it's a nightmare.
Yep.
The nice part is if you can get your handles around the technology that is containers, I think it really lends itself towards upgrading those individual pieces a lot more easily and supporting the modern DevOps. I think that we can go back to multiple interviews on this network that have talked about how that can be an improvement to security. I think we're really starting to see it today. It's really starting to take shape. The jury's still out on Kubernetes. You know, obviously, one of my things that I was talking with Apollo last week was, you know, all of this complexity is scary from a security perspective, from just an operations perspective. I come from a mainframe background, right? That's complex. And anything we do in IT, really in life, complexity can really hurt you, specifically with security. And I think that once you can overcome that and get a handle on it, Kubernetes is trying to help you with that. Although, like, I get mixed reactions from people when we talk about a couple of these new technologies like Kubernetes and like Amazon's container service. Apollo was kind of a fan. Others on Twitter are not fans.
Imagine that.
But it was, you know, it was something that even Larry was asking about, you know, deploying your containers. He's like, can't we just deploy them out into a cloud service? I'm like, yeah, well, I learned Amazon has this service.
Right.
But it is kind of limiting. So,
well, anytime you can create rule enforcement tools, you need them. You don't want them. Nobody wants them. No developers want those tools. We all hate them. We've all hated them. I hate rules. You hate rules. We all hate rules. I hate it when accountants show up and tell me I've got to have this paperwork and that paperwork filed. But the truth is that in a complex environment, like an enterprise environment, very quickly, you know, you go, like when I first had a job and I went out of computer science and I'd always been doing all my own stuff and I built all my own things and I managed all my own things, you know, I had control of it. And all of a sudden, I went from being a sysop on a system and I controlled everything to being in this giant system that consisted of so many thousands of pieces that had been developed by people over years and years and years at different sites and different places with different rules and different languages. And putting all that together and then trying to enforce security rules and security protocols on it is a massive challenge. And somebody has to dive into that later. And this is back to the, you know, the burned up pile of ashes in the parking lot. And I'm not exaggerating. I didn't have anybody struck by lightning, but twice have taken over jobs for dead people, and you know, where the person was literally deceased. Maybe not in such a dramatic way. Once it was just, you know, the person was deceased. The other time it was like car accident thing. But I mean, how do you jump into that?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, the world is crashing down around us and we have to fix it all. And they're like, okay, you got 3 hours, jump in here and there's like 9,000 products that have been built that are accessing all these different APIs and nobody has any idea where any of it goes. And the only documentation is some notes somebody made the margin of a book. Good luck.
I want to talk about evaluating products really quickly. As Sophos XG Firewall was rated by NSS Labs as the fastest highest performing products by NSS Labs. Take these with a grain of salt. Obviously, I have like this whole mantra I go into about testing vulnerability management systems. But anytime you test something, it's really hard to account for all of the variables to say that this product is better than this other product is organization specific. And how you measure it is completely the way that you're defining that ranking system. Right. And I often find that not that people are intentionally leaving things out, but some of my like science background, right, is like that may not be a very accurate testing methodology. Like your testing methodology is going to tell you something, but what I often find is the testing methodologies employed by organizations today aren't qualifying the right things to help them make the best decision.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen all kinds of testing methodologies down through the years. I've seen statistical violations. I've seen rule violations. So much of it depends on your organization and how they use things.
Yep.
If I just say, I'm going to pump packets through this and see how fast it pumps packets through, well, yeah, that's an absolute measurement. But what kind of packets and how many of them and then how mixed up are they and what different types are there? Yeah. And there's so many ways we could build these kind of tests. I mean, it's why you almost wish there was something like NIST that could sit down and perform a set of standards that said, here's the score, like miles per gallon. But even miles per gallon is one of those nebulous things, or how much tar and nicotine there is in a cigarette.
But it's also usability, too.
Absolutely.
Like, I've seen projects fail because it just wasn't usable. I've seen projects fail because it just didn't fit with the culture. Yeah. Just the way that you operate was different. And it may have been the best product, the best, in air quotes, product for the specific problem that you're trying to solve. But because of all these other factors, and those are important to keep in mind, I think the things that Doug are saying, usability is important, how it fits in your organization, your culture, your processes, that type of thing. It's not often, I think, us as engineers are like, well, I want this product because it's got this ASIC and it has this performance benchmark in these features, and that's just not.
Well, it's like Linux versus Windows. I mean, Linux versus Windows is the best example of this ever.
Oh, you went there.
I mean, go out there and get any Linux kernel that you want. It's customizable and on and on and on. And it's going to outperform, technically, Windows almost every single time because it's stripped down, it's faster, it's got all these performance enhancements that Windows doesn't necessarily have. But go and try to sell that to a company where people are using Microsoft. So sometimes it's just about, does this fit with your culture?
Yes.
And it's not about the fastest thing. And I can go back to the Prius and the Hummer. Mm-hmm. They both do the same job. One maybe does it a different way than the other one, but they both do the same job. It's up to you then to decide which one of these really fits my organizational culture, which one meets my needs.
Oh, great example. The basically ERP or sales management to like one of the first companies I ever worked for. It was written in Lotus Notes. And it was a nightmare to maintain. Like, I was the IT manager, and so much of my resources went towards maintaining
It was
system.
A nightmare to maintain, I think, was the tagline for Lotus Notes. I think they copyrighted it.
Pretty much. I mean, just finding the places where you had to modify code was half the battle.
Ooh.
So they evaluated this new system. Everyone got trained up on this new system. Everyone was learning this new system. And right as we were going to go, we may even have tried to gone live in parallel. They pulled the plug on it. Yep. And even though I was like, this is great, we don't have all this maintenance and overhead and code to maintain, and it's not Lotus Notes, yay, it just wasn't the right fit for the organization. So running short on time, I'm going to take our pfSense story, move it to the next segment.
Okay.
There are 2 stories in there about the dark side of AI-driven security awareness and the role of machine learning in predictive security. Make sure you go read them. Other than that, we are good. Also, NetScout has a virtualized packet broker. Check that one out as well. With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about egress filtering, which is why we're going to talk about pfSense and briefly touch on using that in the enterprise. Stay tuned.